Coming up on Market to Market, oil interests push back against federal advice on crude oil rail cars. An EU farmer sues the Italian government for the right to plant GMO seeds. And Midwestern farmers work with environmental watchdogs to improve water quality. Those stories and market analysis with Dan Huber next.
Funding for Market to Market is provided by Grinnell Mutual. You think differently about a customer when you stand in the middle of his dreams. We work to make sure you get covered right. Grinnell Mutual, a policy of working together. Information on finding an agent near you is available at grinnellmutual.com. This is the Friday, May 23 edition of Market to Market, the weekly journal of rural America.
Hello, I'm Mike Pearson. Tractors continue to roll throughout the Midwest and South as spring enters its third month. The U.S. economy also appears to have shaken off the strong grip of winter, which had been holding back U.S. economic growth. According to the Conference Board's leading economic index, the U.S. economy grew by 0.4% in April, continuing a three-month trend. The increase was attributed in part to improvements in the sale of new homes last month. Even with the 6.4% rise, sales are still 10% lower than 1 year ago. Wall Street watched records fall as the S&P 500 rode a wave of utility stock investments to hit a record at the end of the week, closing just over 1,900. And this will be the third consecutive Memorial Day weekend where gasoline prices are expected to average around $3.65 per gallon, up from a December 2013 low of $3.20 per gallon. And crude oil prices rose to a two-month high, hitting $104 per barrel. To keep America's gas tanks full, the transportation of crude from the northern reaches of the U.S. to southern refineries continues in earnest. And the increased movement of the black gold is fueling debate across the country. A new study attempts to push back at calls for tougher rules for carrying crude, despite at least 8 major accidents transporting the oil in 2013. The report, funded by the North Dakota Petroleum Council, found the volatility of Bakken oil comparable to other light crudes with characteristics falling well within the margin of safety for the current fleet. The National Transportation Safety Board has urged that existing rail cars, some of them older and defective, be retrofitted or phased out of service. Petroleum industry supporters dispute calls for stronger tankers by federal officials. Adding capacity would be reduced and likely require more trains to make up the lost volume. Canadian investigators have said the crude involved in the explosion at Lac Megantic was highly volatile and comparable to gasoline. Since the redevelopment of the Bakken region in 2008, 70% of the region's more than 1 million barrels of oil produced daily are moved via rail. According to officials at the United Nations, the world's population will grow 30% in the next 3 decades to exceed 9 billion. And they say farmers will need new technologies to produce more food from less land with fewer hands. One of those new technologies is genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, seeds which have been designed to resist pests and herbicides. The use of GMOs has not been without controversy. Farmers in the United States and Brazil lead the world in the use of genetically modified seeds. But in the European Union, where more than 40 types of GMOs have been approved, the road to the introduction of a new variety is full of legal roadblocks. And each member country can decide to put an outright ban in place. But one farmer is fighting local laws to plant the seed of his choice. After years of negative public opinion in the European Union regarding genetically modified crops, Italy officially banned Monsanto's MON 810 maize last year, citing risks to biodiversity. But according to EU policy, sowing the controversial seeds is still permitted. In 2010, the European Commission announced it would allow the 28 member nations to have the final word on cultivation of genetically altered seeds within their own borders. But some farmers in Italy's Corn Belt say the larger EU legislation gives them the right to plant approved genetically modified seeds, despite local laws to the contrary.
I want to use biotechnology because I want to feed myself and my family with GMOs because I think they are healthier and more nutritious.
At the center of a political battle are 7 acres of Giorgio Fidonato's GMO corn in Italy's northern region of Friuli. Fidonato claims growing GMO corn is simply good business, especially for feeding animals. While Italy outlaws the cultivation of genetically modified organisms, it does import GMO corn and soybeans for use in livestock production. Some Italian cattle ranchers agree with Fidonato and cite the favorable economics of growing GMO crops for animal feed in their own fields. Over the past 4 years, the Italian government has twice confiscated MON 810 GMO crops from Fidonato's fields and charged him in local, regional, and federal courts. Last month, the Administrative Court of Rome declared that the farmer from Friuli is illegally planting GMOs in Italian soil. But that farmer refuses to back down, claiming Italy's political and judicial system is distorting European law. And as he continues to farm defiantly, Fidonato is appealing the court's decision with the help of donations from sympathetic farmers. He claims that over 400 other local producers would like to grow GMO corn, but fear the consequences. GMO opponents in Italy are angry, organized, and in some cases equally prepared to take the law into their own hands. The activist group Greenpeace snipped buds and interfered with the pollination of Fidonato's GMO crops in 2010. The organization claims current research is insufficient to show genetically altered seeds are not harmful to the environment. And the legal battle could soon find its way back into the European Parliament as Italy assumes the 6-month presidency of the EU in July. Late this week, Congress passed the Water Resources and Development Act of 2014 and sent it to the president for his signature. The measure plows a little more than $12 billion into flood control projects, improvements to U.S. ports, and expansion of Mississippi River locks and dams. While the improvements to the Big Muddy's infrastructure will help move more grain, it won't do anything to stop Midwestern nitrates from reaching the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Row crop farmers usually get a black eye from environmentalists for the higher nitrate levels. But in one major grain-producing state, growers and environmental watchdogs find themselves working together to protect and improve water quality. In this second installment of a 2-part series examining the issue, Paul Yeager discovered the partnership is yielding results.
According to the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, 30% of the 880 municipal water supplies in the state of Iowa are highly susceptible to contamination from nitrates. While there are many contributors, agriculture is often viewed as the primary source.
We've seen some places in the country where the federal government has stepped in and try and regulate pieces around water quality with not a lot of success, and certainly not near the size of an area we're talking about in the Mississippi River Basin or Iowa itself.
In October of 2013, lawmakers in Iowa allocated an additional $22.4 million, doubling support to conservation and water quality improvements. $2.8 million was earmarked for a cost-sharing program designed to help farmers implement nutrient reduction strategies that include planting cover crops.
We can do better, and if we focus on this, I think we'll get more tools and we'll figure out better ways of doing it. If that holds off the federal government from addressing this, I think this is a better, more effective way to make that happen, rather than have somebody thousands of miles in an office someplace draw a circle on a map and say, everybody does this in a certain area. We need that flexibility. We need, I think, the ingenuity of producers.
The Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, the culmination of 2 years of work by the Iowa Department of Agriculture, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and Iowa State University, found that cover crops were the best single practice farmers could implement to reduce pollution from nitrates. In Griswold, Iowa, it is hoped cover crops planted in the well's capture zone will be the solution to reducing high nitrate levels in the city's water supply.
We have family and friends that live in town, so we need to do what we can to protect the groundwater there also. And our wells come out of that too, so we need to protect what we drink also.
Brent Bierbaum farms 2,500 acres of corn and soybeans near Griswold, Iowa. He planted ryegrass as a cover crop after the harvest, but his neighbor Kenny Cousins applied seed to standing corn.
We flew rye on September 3rd, and we got some nice rains after that, and we've got some good germination on the seed, and I think it's probably 4 or 5 inches tall out there now.
While there are risks and costs involved with aerial seeding, there are benefits. Aerial seeding makes it possible to plant large areas quickly. It also extends the growing season because it allows the cover crop to be planted prior to harvesting the cash crop.
If we get some fall rains, the stuff takes right off. The rye is an amazing little kernel that it'll turn itself around and put a root down just so easily. And holding them nutrients available so they don't get away from the farmer should be a real plus for everybody involved.
While Bierbaum and Cousins planted rye as a cover crop in Griswold, just down the road, Max Potter planted a combination of oats and turnips.
The cover crop we got here is oats and turnips. We put it in where we chop. This is really, I guess, the first year we've done that. And with all the interest in cover crops right now, we thought we would try it.
Oats as a cover crop deters weed growth, while turnips, described by some as cow candy, prevents soil compaction.
When we get the rest of the corn harvested, as you can see behind me, we only chopped about half of this little field. And when we get the rest of the crop out, then we'll pasture the cows in here too. So it serves as a dual purpose. It provides us with cow feed as well as, helping with erosion. And so the better we can take care of stuff and hold it here and hopefully not get it into the water system, the better off everybody is. So it's not just for us, but it's, the community and the country, I guess you'd say.
Cover crops aren't the only cost-effective solution municipalities are employing to keep agricultural runoff from entering water supplies. In Elliott, Iowa, with a population of only 350 people, a $300,000 to $1 million nitrate removal facility was out of the question. The solution decided upon did not involve planting cover crops, but instead to take cropland out of production.
And, we talked to the committee, we voted on it, and this is what we decided. Try to do it naturally and have a wetland, and this will be more permanent, on the outcome.
The city purchased 18 acres of marginal farmland and, along with 4 acres donated by the school district, was able to construct a 22-acre wetland. While the primary goal of the wetland will be to filter nitrates out of the town's water supply, it will also be a gathering place for the community. Walking trails have been constructed, and the wetland will be used by the school it borders as an outdoor classroom for environmental education.
So neat. A project, I can't even tell you how amazing this is.
The dragonfly?
Uh-huh, that's a baby dragonfly.
That's disgusting.
No, it's very cool. With our new electronics world, children don't go outside anymore. They don't touch living things. And this is an outstanding way to incorporate core standard classroom curriculum and bring it out here outside where it's more hands-on. And you can see these kids have been working on that out here for probably an hour now, and they're still quite intrigued and enthused and curious as to what little things are in their tubs of water.
While it is too early to assess a change in nitrate levels in Elliott, in Remsen, water monitoring tests have shown great results after the town of 1600 converted nearly 100 acres of cropland to native grasses. Becky Ortman is the Source Water Protection Coordinator for Iowa's Department of Natural Resources.
We know that if you plant native grasses in an area that's highly susceptible
to anything on the surface as far as nitrate application or manure or anything like that, we know that native grasses work.
We can test them.
Prior to planting native grasses, the city's water at wellhead number 8 showed nitrate levels at nearly 3 times the 10 parts per million considered safe. 3 years after seeding a 100-acre prairie, test results indicate nitrate levels have been reduced by 40% at wellhead 8 and 30% overall.
So for the community of Elliott, a wetland, that worked for them. For Griswold, cover crops work for them. For Rims in Iowa, putting in native grasses, converting cropland to native grasses work for them. So it's what we're trying to do is gather more of a suite of practices that will work in any community.
For Market to Market, I'm Paul Yeager.
Next, the Market to Market report.
Strong export demand and good planting weather dominated the trade this week, leaving the market with mixed results on Friday. For the week, July wheat lost 22 cents, while the nearby corn contract moved a nickel lower. Soybeans were pushed higher on the news of Chinese orders as the July contract added 50 cents. The nearby meal contract followed suit with a gain of $22.40 per ton. In the softs, cotton lost ground for the third consecutive week as the July contract declined by $3.51 per hundredweight. In the dairy market, June Class 3 milk gained 52 cents, while the deferred contract put on 51 cents per hundred. Over in livestock, the August cattle contract lost $1.25. August feeders declined by 47 cents, and the July lean hog contract lost $1.53. In the financials, the euro lost 7 basis points against the dollar. Crude oil gained $2.77 per barrel. COMEX gold fell back by $1.70 per ounce, and the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index gained a little more than 5 points to settle at 658.65. Here now to lend us his insight on these and other trends is our newest market analyst, Dan Huber. Dan, thanks for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here.
Well, let's jump into the market. We saw wheat pull back quite a bit this week, down 21 cents on the nearby. Talk us through that a little bit. What's happening in the market?
Well, realistically, the wheat market peaked about 2.5 weeks ago and has been in a pullback mode ever since. And so much of it is we've just lost the story, the bull story at this point in time. If you go back 2 weeks ago, we were, of course, talking about the drought in Kansas, Oklahoma, which is really still there, although the weather forecasts do call for some moisture. But we know the damage has been done. I mean, the crops that have been destroyed, they were not coming back. But also adding fuel to the fire was the whole turmoil going on in Ukraine. That is now by no means settled, but at least we're not seeing the riots in the streets and the bloodshed and whatnot. In fact, today I read Putin said whoever is elected on this, the election that's going to be held over this weekend, he's going to be more than willing to work with. So that's really settled that down. So you took away the bull story. And like in any market, you need to feed that bull every day to continue it to move. You take the feed away and it's going to contract, which is exactly what we've seen in the wheat market right now.
And we're still looking at large global supplies on the wheat market?
Absolutely. You know, when you move outside of this country, there had been a little bit of talk earlier this week that there was concerns about some dry conditions in the Volga area of Russia. Forecasts now call for some cooler and wetter temperatures there. Russia as a whole does look tremendous. I'm sorry, not Russia. Europe as a whole looks tremendous. Russia looks good. Ukraine even looks good. So it's outside of the borders of the United States, there's very little concern about wheat production at this point. And yeah, I think that's really what's come back home to roost here in the wheat market in the last 2 weeks.
So as we look, as producers take stock of what they've got, looking at this trend, are we in now a sustained downward trend? Do you figure would this be a great time to maybe be making some sales, or do you hold off and try to get a weather scare?
You know, like any market, we tend to ebb and flow. We'll get oversold and we'll get overbought. Right now, I think we're probably nearing the point where we're a little bit oversold, probably due for some type of a corrective rebound to the upside. So, no, I would hold off on prices or hold off on sales at this point. I don't think it's unthinkable at all to see July futures work back towards the $7, $6.90 to $7 range. Maybe at that point would be an ideal time to catch up on sales if they're not done already.
All right. Well, now let's jump over to the corn market. Had some good weather throughout the Corn Belt. We saw some planters get rolling here in the last 2 weeks. We saw corn slide back a little bit this week. was that pressure put on by planting or just spillover from wheat?
Combination. Certainly the wheat pressure drug on the corn. Of course, you had beans on the other side that were probably pulling back the other way. But we're really here too. We've talked this market up on. We know the demand is significantly better than we thought 3 months ago. Domestic usage and export demand combined. But on the same token, you can only talk about that story for so long. We need something fresh to continue it up. We know planting still in the Minnesota, the Dakotas, Wisconsin to a lesser extent is still behind normal. But the weather outlook has not been bad this week. We know there's been a lot of catch up. And again, just took away that bull story and the markets kind of fell back on their own weight. So really, realistically, comparatively, corn's dropped about 10%. In the last 2 weeks, wheat's dropped about 12%, so they're not too far behind each other. But but the grains have just been in a little bit of a sinking mode here right now.
All right, now, so again, advice to producers as we're looking at that corn start emerging here in a lot of places through the Corn Belt. Do you hold off on your sales and hope for a scare and a reason to feed the bull a little bit later this summer?
I certainly would at this point. We have got the entire growing season ahead of us. You know, there's bound to be some kind of a hiccup here or there. We know the demand side of it right now is probably going to keep us from completely collapsing, at least until the market feels very comfortable that we have a crop under our belts. We've gone from, if we went back to January before the final reports were last year, we had people thinking we were going to see a 2 billion bushel carryout. This year, that's now been dwindled down to less than 1.2 billion bushels. So the necessity to produce a good crop this year is there. We've raised that risk parameter a little bit, and until I think the market feels a little more comfortable, we can do that. We're not going to totally take this market to the downside.
All right. Well, now let's jump over to soybeans, the one commodity that was in the black this week. Just surprised at the continued export demand?
Oh, absolutely. The bean market surprises time and time again. Probably less of a surprise on the old crop than the new crop, which has continued to rise as well. But on the old crop, probably what shook the market a little bit this week was that China actually stepped into the meal market again. It looks like they probably purchased some meal out of South America. Granted, they're not coming to this country. We had positive export sales again. I think we sold another 6 million bushels, which still takes us 49 million bushels above what's been projected. So we know we're going to have to import that many beans or see some cancellations come along. So it's more of a prove it to me at this point. We may have the numbers balanced out on paper, but until we see that demand really stop, that continues to push the front side of the market up. Now, granted, we didn't really hold the highs. We did poke into the highest level for a spot bean future since July of last year, but couldn't hold that for the weekend. And sure, long weekend might have created some profit taking, but on the same token, it's pretty tough to sustain prices in these levels without something additional stimulating us. And we're kind of at that balance point right now that either we're going to need something friendly and new, or there might be some money taken off the table here as well.
All right, so keep an eye open. We've got to feed that bull.
Absolutely.
To keep these prices up there. Now, as we jump over on the livestock side, as we take a look at feeder cattle, we saw a pretty substantial pullback. Would have been a positive week were it not for Friday.
Sure.
What happened on Friday?
I think the long weekend had a lot to do with what happened in all the livestock markets, but certainly in the feeder cattle market as we came into the end of the week. Here we've had this historic meteoric rise in all livestock markets, and even with the feeder market, you would think with the lower feed grains that we've seen this week would have stimulated them some. But again, for all of these, of course, cattle, hogs, and feeders, we've looked at almost a year-long advance in these markets. The grains, a good solid 2 to 3 months advance. And oftentimes people just say, enough's enough. We have a 3-day weekend, brings a lot of uncertainty in. Let's just take some of our money home and we'll look at something fresh again next week.
Now, on the fundamental side, as we're looking at fresh news on the cattle side, is there anything we're anticipating? Demand has been relatively strong for this time of year. Is there still room to the upside, looking at the feeder cattle, to get to that 200?
I personally think the room to the upside is somewhat limited. And again, not that we're going to see prices reverse and collapse by any stretch of the imagination. It's going to take some time to rebuild herds. It's going to take some time to really correct the situation that's out there. But consumers are starting to shop around. You're definitely going to see price resistance at that meat counter at this point in time. Look at the lower cuts of meat. Look at over the poultry markets. And it's, again, all markets mature over time, and I think we have a very mature market all across in the livestock sector at this point.
All right, now let's talk fat cattle again, just briefly. We saw a little bit of a pullback there. We're still up in record territory. We've been hovering in record territory for some time. Do we anticipate this to continue for some time?
Really, I think a very similar situation there. I think we could maintain the gains, maybe move into more of a trading range instead of a continually rising market. But that said, it's here too. You're finding the resistance. I think we're starting to see the retail side of it back off a little bit, and the. To continue to stimulate the growth. Now, granted, some of the things that are happening in the industry, if we're holding heifers back for breeding purposes, that type of thing, can create a short-term, smaller quantity of meat in the market. But ultimately, that the market realizes why that's happening. You can't sustain a market for any extended period of time, just on those kind of circumstances either.
The best cure for high prices, of course.
It's high prices.
That's right. Now let's talk the hog market. We saw again a pullback again this week. Still very strong. Hog market, are we range bound?
The hog market really has been several weeks now in kind of a contraction mode. Still not back to as low as we had traded a month ago, where we had bounced off again. I think it's probably going to stabilize right in this area, here as well. Not that we have a tremendous amount of upside potential necessarily as we move out into the summer, but could get, again, as you said, into more of a trading range. If you look at the June, I think we got down to about 116 as a base. That could hold us well through the summer months. And of course, by the time we get out to fall, we should start to see numbers kind of recoup again. We seem to be past the biggest devastation of the PED virus, and we already know the industry has kind of met part of that by increasing the weights of the animals we're marketing. But nonetheless, it's just like cattle. It does not. You don't have a quick fix here. It's going to take some time to get these numbers rebuilt again.
All right. Well, Dan, really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight.
Most certainly, my pleasure to be here.
That wraps up this edition of Market to Market. But Dan and I will continue our discussion and answer more of your questions in our Market Plus segment online. You'll also find audio podcasts and streaming video of our program, as well as links to our Twitter feed, Facebook page, and the rest of our social media outlets exclusively at the Market to Market website. And be sure to join us next week when we'll explore how the transportation of electrical energy across state lines is gaining the attention of local farmers. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Mike Pearson. Have a great week.
Market to Market is a production of Iowa Public Television, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for Market to Market is provided by Grinnell Mutual. You think differently about a customer when you stand in the middle of his dreams. We work to make sure you get covered right. Grinnell Mutual, a policy of working together. Information on finding an agent near you is available at grinnellmutual.com.